So now that we've talked about internal versus external iterators, and I've shown you some examples, let's talk about the pros and cons of each approach and why you would choose one or the other. So there's a bunch of reasons why internal iterators are more effective and more concise than external iterators. One is they help to improve the readability of the code. So here's the version of that program we just looked at over here. And then here's the other version that uses the more traditional way of doing things. So if you take a look at this code, this version that uses the streams approach focuses more on the what than the how. Again, no control constructs, no loops, there's no if statements, no switches, and so on. Conversely, this code, which does the same thing, focuses more on the how. So we have an if statement, and there's a for loop, and so on. So it's just a little bit extra work to go on here, although it does the same thing. The other thing you have to be aware of with this code is you have to make sure that you properly initialize the array list or the list of URLs. You have to make sure you call add. So it's just a little bit more error prone. Another cool thing with the internal iteration model is it's really easy to optimize. So we can go from the sequential version to a parallel version. So we can simply say stream of URL array dot parallel, and that will transparently run the stream in parallel. Now, if you only have 7 elements in your array, it's probably overkill. But if you had a huge array that had lots and lots of elements, then this could actually be a big performance speed up if you had a multi-core processor. Conversely, this approach here implements the so-called accumulator anti-pattern, which we talked about very briefly when we discussed the difference between functional and object-oriented programming. And you can see that this is always going to put things in a single thread into this URLs collection. So getting this code to be parallelized is a lot of work, whereas getting this code to be parallelized is really, really simple. So again, another benefit of internal iteration. So those are some of the benefits. Another thing is fewer bugs. This particular approach doesn't split the creation of the collection from its initialization, whereas this code here does. So you have to first create this list, and then you have to add to it. Whereas this, we create the list and stick it in here as part of the terminal operation on the stream. So it's just fewer things to remember to do. It does it for you. It makes sure things are initialized as they're created. However, of course, there's always pros and cons. And there's some advantages of external iterators over internal iterators. So one of the key advantages of external iterators is that you have more control over the iteration steps. So in the internal iteration version, we can't exit this stream without throwing an exception, which you can do, but it's a bit, sort of like a sledgehammer-like approach. Streams really want to run to completion, although you can get out if you need to by exceptions. Conversely, in this case, if for whatever reason we didn't want to handle something that didn't have that particular flag on it, we could just break out of that particular segment. Probably do a continue, actually, is better than a break. But the point is that you can control the flow of execution with an external iterator because it's just like programming any other Java control construct, like a loop or a switch or whatnot. Whereas you can't do that as easily with a stream unless you throw an exception, which is kind of overkill. You can also have multiple iterators active at a time. So here is a situation where we might actually have multiple iterators over the same collection, and they can run in different ways on different parts of the collection at the same time. And that's because each iterator has its own state, whereas with the internal version, they have only one iterator taking place at a time. So there's only one internal iteration that can be taking place on a stream at a given time. So as usual, the trade-off is between sort of greater control, which external iterators give you, versus simplifying the processing in the common case. So for my money, it's almost always advantageous to use the internal iterations, but it's important to also be aware that there are pros and cons, and it's your job as a programmer, a designer, an architect, a computer scientist to know those trade-offs. those are the kinds of things people like to ask in like interview questions when you go look for a job. Okay, so that is the end of this discussion. We will have class on Wednesday. We will continue walking through sequential streams, and I will get the new assignment out here very shortly.